Welcome to Shorty SuperCoach and welcome to another player profile, and we can really get stuck into footy season now. The tennis is done. I'm sure many of you saw Roger Federer last night. Unbelievable display. He's just an unbelievable player, unbelievable man. Love watching him, and of course Wozniacki getting up in an epic women's final as well was great to see too. So that's Shorty's tennis fix for the meantime. I'll be looking forward to a bit more Grand Slam action later in the year and cover it a little bit, but it is now absolutely time to click into footy season, and that will mean plenty of player profiles. I've got a couple of dockers coming up over the next few days. Obviously I had Wingard the other day, and a bit of a rough plan for how I'll do it. I think we'll stick with the player profile format for still a little while. I think I will be doing more of your established types at the moment, and then as we get a little bit more training news and pre-season news, really the articles start to flow on where so-and-so's been training and where this fella might line up. That's when I might like to take a bit more of a closer look at your Christian Petrarca or Jordan De Goey and those types. I think I didn't want to do too many of those guys where I'm just going to be doing a player profile in December and January and just saying, well, yeah, I really like his prospect, but let's just see where he lines up. I thought I'd wait just to do it a little bit closer to pre-season, even though people and myself are looking forward to talking about and hearing thoughts on those guys because they're quite interesting, those mid-price types and fellas who might break into the elite bracket. But there is that crucial element of where their primary position might be, and I think we just need to get, even if it's just a little bit of word through the pre-season, just to add some actual fact to the discussion rather than just pie in the sky sort of thoughts on where a fella might line up, and if he does, then he might score this. So I will be doing a few more of those guys, a few more of the ones that might provoke a bit more debate. But until then, we might look at a few more established players, or at least players that we're a bit more aware of what they're bringing to the table and can make informed decisions on their selection and the discussion. But today, Jake Lloyd, I think he's an interesting guy to take a look at. Now, our backline already has lost Sam Doherty, who would have been many people's teams, and not far from that would have been Zach Williams. Many, if they didn't have him already, would have probably looked to replace Doherty with a bloke like Zach Williams. But they're both out, long-term injuries. We may need to take a look elsewhere. I had a look at Brandon Ellis. He probably comes into slight more calculations as well, but I think Jake Lloyd is definitely one we've got to consider. And if you go to his profile, take a look at the stats, well, it doesn't look overly convincing. 4 seasons, 58.4, 69.3, 84.6 in a mini breakout, and last season 87.3. So why on earth would we be paying touch under 480k for a bloke who hasn't even broken into the 90s as an average yet? Yeah, he's 24 years old, nearly played 100 games. He's virtually in the prime, one would say, in a pretty good team. But I'll walk you through a couple of factors that I feel makes him a very good option this season, at least at this point in time. I must say, I will need a bit of encouragement through the pre-season, as I've already touched on just before. We'll need a bit of encouragement just to see that he is playing some good footy, and I'm sure he'll be playing an offensive role off the half-back line, but you'd just like to see, when you're picking a fella who hasn't really got the runs on the board, sometimes you just like to see that, yes, they are hitting the season full of run and they're looking good. So rounds 1 to 9 last season is what I really want to look at first. Now, I remember last season this time, a lot of the discussion was maybe 2 players who could really break into their first elite numbers in the back line. That was Jake Lloyd and Zach Tui. I remember comparing them quite often, and I ended up going Zach Tui, and he marginally went better than Lloyd, but neither of them really did what we had hoped. They both averaged in the late 80s. It's not what we wanted. Now, rounds 1 to 9 for Jake Lloyd delivered an average of 100.1, which is extremely impressive. And then he cops a head knock against the Hawks in round 10. Concussed, just 4 points, and you just never know how that concussion affected him for the rest of the season. But it is interesting to contrast before and after that head knock. As we know, concussion affects all players differently. Sometimes the effects can linger. Sometimes you can be good as gold within a week or so. Sometimes you can not quite feel yourself for a solid month or so. Whatever the case was, rounds 12 to 23, Jake Lloyd averaged 84.4. And of course, we saw that end up severely dropping what was a three-figure average down to 87.3. Now, I'm not blaming a head knock for what is around 3 months of not his best football. But clearly I think there would have been a bit of an element that did affect that. And it broke up his season, you know. He was flying. He was looking good. He was averaging about 30 touches, leading the Swans best and fairest. He ended up finishing equal second behind Luke Parker and joint with Buddy Franklin. But certainly, sometimes when a player is flying and then they cop an injury or have to miss a couple of weeks, not only do they have to work their body back to where it was and where they'd like it to be, but it just puts a stop to that continuity that they had in good football. And you've got to find that form again while you're getting back to some of your best physical states. So I just think it's not an ideal thing to cop a head knock at any point, but when you're in form in the middle of the season and you've got to buy and all this sort of thing, it wasn't ideal for Jakey Lloyd. So I do feel that 87.3 is not quite a true reflection of how good his season was. Obviously, if we take that 4 points out, you know, I think from memory, I haven't written it down, but that would have put him around the 90 or early 90s, I believe. Get the calculators out for that one. But I really do feel as if he will, again, take a step. If we want to call last year's step a 6 to 8 point improvement, I can see something similar. Certainly a 4 to 6 improvement from his average minus that 4 points. I can see him averaging around the 95 mark. Again, I can still see development. I think the Swans will look to hand him the ball plenty of times, which they have already done. But, you know, someone like Jared McVeigh, they're similar types, but clearly McVeigh has been past his best, and he's the man who once played that role. Now it's Lloyd's to really take on, and I think we'll see that to really good effect. Now, what can we expect from Lloyd? Well, expect high possession numbers, and much of those uncontested. He is your classic, I guess, handball received guy. He does intercept, you know, average 4.7 intercepts per game, 435 metres gained. So he is the sort of player that the Swans like to put the ball in his hands, be a distributor, 16 kicks to the 9 handballs on average. So I do think he's that type of halfback flanker who's a genuine rebounder and has shown the ability to push up towards the stoppage. Now, I don't see him becoming a midfielder at this point, but the Swans midfield is fairly strong. But I do see, like a bit with the talk of Tui, those really good kicks of the ball. I think if you can work them up to the stoppage and not necessarily winning the clearance, but having a couple of chains of handball out to them and they're distributing it inside 50 off a wing. So I don't see him lining up on a wing or in the centre bounce, but I could definitely see him rolling up to find his way on the end of a successful Swans clearance. And not always do I feel he'll just be playing on from a kick out and kicking long, or just getting a cheap little kick from, you know, outside 50 just to the halfback flank. I do feel that those types of players, the club really wants to utilise their weapons. And I do remember watching him quite a bit in those early stages of last season, and he was pushing up to not just solely being a defensive 50 player, and certainly was getting around the stoppage and getting it fed out to him and using his, you know, disposal efficiency quite well. So, as you would have seen, he is in my team at the moment. Of course, I put a video up the other week, just a bit of a quick run through and a bit of a first draft mock-up side. Certainly nothing concrete about it, particularly those rookies, but gave you an insight to the structure and a few of the guys who I'm liking the looks of at the moment, and Jake Lloyd is one of those. So by all means, give me your thoughts on him. I think he's quite an interesting one. We don't have a stack of options in the back line that have proven year after year. We've certainly got a couple that I think we'll bank on, but the defenders are always one that can be a little flimsy. We can't always trust them year on year like we can midfielders. So I think Lloyd could be a guy that is certainly worth considering, and equally has an element of risk in the fact that he doesn't have the runs on the board and doesn't have a 3-figure average or a 90 average on his resume for SuperCoach. But certainly the upside is there, and at this point in time, he'll be in my side, and I'll be looking to see what he can produce through the pre-season. So give me your thoughts. I'm excited to get stuck into this SuperCoach pre-season in a full-on manner. Of course, I was watching plenty of the tennis, plenty of the cricket over the last couple of months, but it's fair to say that in amongst a little bit of Davis Cup and a little bit of a tour of South Africa, we will be hitting football very hard. So I look forward to it. I look forward to you getting on board and watching plenty of the videos, plenty of comments, plenty of likes, and hopefully a few more subscribers to get us up to that 1,000 mark, which would be great. So I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks again. Cheers.